Good evening, sir, and good morning to all. Let's start the session with a silent prayer. Once again, warm greetings to one and all present here. Dear distinguished guests, delegates from other institutions, and my dear colleagues. Internationalization of education strategies integrates intercultural and global dimension into the goals of teaching, learning, research, and service functions of a university or higher education system. Higher education system acts as a catalyst that can impact national competitiveness by attracting international research initiatives, corporate partnerships, and facilitating the mobility of the students and faculty talent. With this humble note on the theme, I extend a very warm welcome to our principal, Reverend Dr. Augustine George, management team of fathers, deans, HODs, professors, and all the delegates across the globe to this session on internationalization of higher education, opportunities, and challenges. A special note of welcome to Dr. Phil Laird, Vice Provost, Trinity Western University, Canada, who is the resource person for this session. We welcome you, Professor. Before handing over the session, let me take the privilege to introduce our eminent resource person. Dr. Phil Laird is an experienced academician with more than 23 years of university experience and a blend of academic leadership, championing university goals and initiatives, and developing new programs that increase local, national, and international enrollments. Dr. Laird possesses an expert knowledge of university operations and senior leadership from experience as a faculty member with an excellence in teaching and academic impact, serving on a variety of task forces and committees globally. Professor is a pioneer in public speaking, organizational restructuring, program development, building strategic alliance, and providing visionary leadership for the educational entrepreneurial activities. On behalf of the management and organizing committee, I extend a very warm welcome to you, Professor. We are eagerly awaiting to hear from you, Professor. Now, without much delay, I request Professor Laird to take over the session. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you for that kind introduction. It is good to see you all there in the morning at Kristu Jayanti in Bangalore. I'm here in the evening in Canada, so I think behind you. Sometimes we feel very behind, my Indian friends, but we're behind you by I think about 13 hours or something like that. It's great to be with you. Next time, I hope to be there in person so we can spend some time eating together and talking together rather than just on the Zoom session. I'm going to share my screen now and put my presentation up, and I'll start without further ado moving into the presentation. The background of my presentation is a runner in the background because I believe that global collaboration between institutions is a marathon and not a sprint. I've met many universities around the world who want to establish global cooperation and collaboration, and we meet with them one time, and that's all we meet with them, and we stop meeting with them. And to do real collaboration, you have to be committed to 10, 20, 30 years of relationship building, and that's how internationalization really works. It's relationships, it's visiting each other regularly, spending time talking to each other, eating together, serving each other's needs, helping each partner out when they need support, and that's really how things work well in the international stage. I'm going to talk, before I move on, about COVID-19 and what it means. And we're living in a new normal. And this new normal is an interesting one. You know, last week I hosted a conference, and in the conference I asked students, respond to this question. COVID-19 is the greatest challenge you've had in your lifetime, on the one hand, or COVID-19 is the greatest opportunity we've ever had in our lifetime. And I wanted students to think about that, because I think COVID-19 has changed all of us, and it's changed economies and education. But the question will be whether it's changed things for the better. Many of the changes in COVID-19, if we look 5 and 10 years right down the road, will make the world a better place. COVID-19 has changed how society functions, and we're witnessing economic havoc affecting millions around the world. Every corner of the earth is experiencing health concerns and fear, and traditional forms of education have permanently changed. What we have noticed with the pandemic around the world is that certain forms of technology, especially technology that's related to either mediating the customer and the service provider, or communication and engagement, have ballooned. And so we've got Zoom, Cisco WebEx, and Microsoft Teams here as examples of this technological change and expansion. And if you look at global technology, you see that Zoom, at the beginning of the year, Zoom had a market cap of $19 billion. Today, that number has risen to more than 125 billion in 1 year. And Zoom has continued to add new features to their platform, and we're using Zoom today. And they continue to improve their video conferencing technology. And students all around the world in universities and even in high schools have used Zoom as a main means of getting through the pandemic. Cisco WebEx video conferencing recorded 324 million users in March, with more than double user growth in the United States. And Microsoft Teams has surpassed 44 million daily active users, more than double the 20 million active users it reported just 1 year ago in November of 2019. And I believe that these global technologies that we now have, just like we're speaking to each other with me in Canada and all of you in India, gives us a much greater opportunity for international collaboration. Where in the past we may have had to travel back and forth, spend a lot of money, spend a lot of time and resource, there's an opportunity today to engage in international collaboration between institutions with a minimum of actual travel back and forth, reducing the cost of participation for institutions and increasing the impact and increasing the breadth of collaboration than we would have had before. But even with all these changes, there are big problems in higher education, and the NEP 2020 plan highlights some of these problems in India. More than 1 billion children this year are at risk of falling behind due to school closures aimed at containing the spread of COVID-19. And those children who are suffering the most are children in poorer households who do not have internet access, personal computers, TV or radio at home. And this amplifies what we call the digital divide, the divide between those who have access to technology and those who don't. Students lacking access to the technologies needed for home-based learning have a limited means to continue their education. And as a result, many of these young children and young people around the world face the loss of 1 or more years of education. And some of them will never be able to go back to school. And that will undo 20 years of progress that we've made in trying to make education more accessible for students. With school closures in 188 countries as of April 2020, many have explored alternatives to delivering education. And with these technologies have come some ingenious alternatives to trying to make education accessible around the world. Now, you might think this discussion of accessibility is different from internationalization, but the reality is it is critical to internationalization, because at the end of the day, the issue for internationalization of education is how do we create access for learners all around the world? And the internet, and I would argue the cell phone, provide the greatest means of accessing the largest number of the world's population. The Loon Project with Google, and there are other players in the Loon Project, is a project where in remote areas, in remote cities where there is not good internet connectivity, at least not at a high enough quality to deliver education, they suspend balloons high above these areas and triangulate Wi-Fi. And so there's internet connection for users on the ground. And this project is a means to try to increase accessible education all around the world. With more than 90% of the countries adopting digital or broadcast remote learning, only 60% of those countries did so for pre-primary education. And so where we have really expanded internet-based learning for high school students and university-age students, there are a lot of young children in pre-primary education who have been left behind in this process. Online platforms were the most used means by the governments around the world to deliver education while schools remained closed, with 83% of countries using this method. However, this allowed for the potential of only reaching about a quarter of the children worldwide, meaning even with online platforms, there are a lot of students left behind. And one of the main reasons for that, and we're finding this at Trinity Western University, one of the main reasons is that we still use the desktop computer or the laptop computer as the main means of educational engagement. And I would argue what we need to do in the future is bypass the computer and start to use the cell phone. And I'll show you a slide that gets at that point in a second. Technology use globally shows these patterns. So if you look at what we see on the screen, in January of 2020, there were 7.75 billion people on Earth. Now that number has increased quite a bit this year, and 55% of them were in urban areas. If you look at this, you'll see that there are 4.54 billion internet users worldwide, 3.8 billion active social media users. So the question you ask yourself is, if there are so many people using the internet and using social media, why is it that so many children were left behind during COVID-19? And the answer is here. Most of the people in the world access the internet using mobile phones. They don't access the internet anymore using computers. In fact, most of the poor around the world don't have access to a desktop or a laptop computer. And so if we want to provide internationalized education for the masses of the world in rural places in India and other areas, we have to think of bypassing the computer as the main means of delivering education and move toward mobile users as the main means. Because you see that of 7.75 billion people in the world, 5.19 or 67% of the people in the world have access to mobile phones. By 2030, there is estimated to be an increase of nearly 120 million students in higher education and 2.3 million internationally mobile students. The world's population by 2030 is expected to grow to 8.551 billion people, an increase of 16%. But higher educational enrollment is expected to grow by 120 million people, or 56% over what it was back in 2015. The question becomes, where is that higher education enrollment coming from? And it's coming from what we would call the global South, Southeast Asia, Africa, India, South America. That's where higher education is growing dramatically. And in those areas, you also have huge numbers of people under the age of 30, large swaths of the population. In some countries, upwards of 65% of the population is under the age of 30. But you also have most of the poor around the world. And so the question for higher education is, how do we create accessible higher education to meet the needs of those 120 million additional learners? International student learners, students who are internationally mobile. And in the past, that has been students from around the world often coming to Western countries, traveling to Europe, Britain, Australia, United States, Canada as main destinations of international students. And I think what we're going to see in the next decade is we're going to see more of those international students going to India and China, who have dramatically increased their capacity and increased the quality of higher education. And so I think India really has to look at learning, especially from those international universities that have been very successful internationally, to learn how to go about the internationalization of their institutions, both from a policy perspective, but also from a service and accessible education perspective. The forces that are facing higher education, I'm going to talk about 6 main forces, and I'm talking about it from a Canadian perspective. So maybe a little different from an Indian perspective, but I'm talking mainly about what are the pressures and changes that are going to impact higher education for me. First, and I've talked about this, technology and education has flattened access to technology and information to anyone with a cell phone and an internet connection. So technology has flattened and smoothed out worldwide access to education. And it really creates a possibility for any university, if they have the right policies, if they have the right people, if they have the right processes, to be able to deliver education around the world. An aging population. Educators around the world are aging. They're getting older, and you'll see that. The leaders at universities, as I travel the world, tend to be people in their 60s today. And they are increasing digital natives, people who are comfortable with technology, who have used technology, who see technology as a means of delivering education. And those new generation of educational leaders will be very willing to experiment with and expand the technological base in order to open up their education to a wider range of learners and create more financially viable institutions in the future. Budget pressures and cost escalation. I believe, and we've seen a little bit of this, but I believe in the future, there is going to be a battle between 2 forces. As COVID-19 ends and vaccines are distributed around the world, countries all around the world will have to figure out how to deal with their mounting healthcare costs. And those mounting healthcare costs may last for 10, 15, 20 years. Governments will have to think about how they deal with those. And I believe we're going to increasingly have cuts in public funding for education. The offset to the mounting healthcare costs is governments are going to say, we can't put as much money into universities, especially we're not going to put as much money into physical campuses and experts. We're not going to invest in physical infrastructure because universities have shown that they can deliver education using technology. And I believe that's going to be a pressure that will come in universities. And that pressure will lead to increased internationalization by its nature in order to deal with this decreased funding. Pandemic will change the psychology of students. There'll be lower international challenges. Health and welfare of countries will matter more to students in their choice. So students will not just say, well, I want to go to a top-ranked university. I want to get an education from a best university in the country. They will look more and more at the health and welfare system around that university before they go to that country, because they'll want to make sure that they're protected, especially after we've seen what we've seen in terms of the pandemic. Labor market shifts. We've seen increased automation and rapid urbanization, and that will increase. There'll be increased pressure for jobs and employment and the needs for lifelong learning. There's a statistic that 65% of the children born today will work in careers that do not yet exist. What that means for universities, not just in terms of internationalization, but it means that universities have to prepare graduates that will be able to change careers 2, 3, 4, 5 times throughout their lifetime. And how are they going to do that? There'll also be a capacity imbalance. There'll be demand for new education in emerging economies, but there'll be a supply in developed countries. And that will create more internationalization of universities. Western countries who are going to survive through the next 10 years are going to be looking at internationalization and trying to find students from around the world. And I believe countries like India will increasingly look to internationalize their university systems. The future pyramid of higher education will expand by way of these new models of learning. In 2015, there were 213 million higher education learners around the world, and 1 billion people with need but no access. They had no way of getting education. By 2030, there'll be 332 million university students. And there will still be 1 billion or more learners who will be interested in higher education but won't have access. But as we're growing, there will be new entrants into the higher education market that will increasingly find financially viable, accessible solutions to meet the needs of the world's poor who need to develop higher educational solutions. What are the key initiatives for universities to achieve their mission and vision and to internationalize going forward? First of all, there's the big idea. The big idea is that we have to think as universities about global learning. We can't just think about local learning. We have to think about how we meet the needs of the learners around the world, the 120 million additional learners, or the 56% growth that is going to be taking place in higher education. And we have to get focused as universities on coming up with real solutions that meet that need. Because at the end of the day, those solutions will create financial benefits for the institutions in growth, in new revenue streams, in new impact of learners. And new impact of learners means greater donations to universities and larger endowments as those graduates graduate. And so there is a cycle that goes on here that helps universities to be successful in the future. Second, universities, in terms of key initiatives, have to figure out how to use blended forms of technology. The research we've done on university students during the COVID-19 pandemic, among our university students and all of the research I've read around the world, is that learners want a blended form of learning. They don't like all online. They're tired of doing face-to-face on Zoom. They're tired of just being online, but they like the flexibility of online. And they want to be in classrooms, but they don't want to be in classrooms learning as much as they were before. They want the flexibility to, maybe in Canada at least, do part-time jobs, or to take up a hobby, or to choose when they want to learn as learners. And so what we are finding is that most of the learners today want a blended or a hybrid approach to learning that is accessible, flexible, and affordable. And it should be noted that a flexible approach using hybrid learning modalities allows for greater internationalization, because you can interface with an international learner either before they come to the country and continue a relationship with them after they go home. Third, orientation to career outcomes. And I know in India, this is huge. And at Kristu Jayanti, it's a massive part of your educational model, which is orienting to career outcomes, finding career placements for students, getting them into their careers. But I believe the universities of the future are going to have an orientation to career outcomes for lifelong learning, not just getting them placed when they graduate, but finding ways to continue to expand their career options well into the future. Credentialing of education. Universities have to figure out how to unbundle credit and accreditation and provide affordable access education in a recognized way. They've got to create structures of credit for open learning system like MOOCs. Today, there are over 9,000 MOOCs being delivered all around the world, and tens of thousands of learners, probably hundreds of thousands of learners, learning in MOOCs. The problem with MOOCs is there's no credentialing and no assessment system. At some point, someone will come along with a way of recognizing and credentialing what people learn out of MOOCs. And when that happens, it will open up a new form of education. Last, universities of the future need to figure out collaboration. They've got to figure out global collaboration, internationalization, and working with partnerships. Specializations, consolidations of institutions, creating collaborations where one institution offers a certain type of degree and becomes expert in those degrees. Another institution offers a different type of expertise, and they collaborate with learners. Collaboration of global partnerships, innovative transnational models of education, where students can do part of a degree in one part of the world, finish their degree in another part of the world, and maybe go to a third part of the world in order to get practicum placement. Universities really need to think about adaptive and innovative partnership structures. The future of strategic global higher education, and I'll go through what I think is going to happen in the future, is these 6 phases. First, phase 1, and I think we're in somewhere between phase 1 and phase 2 right now, which is integration of online learning. And COVID-19 has dramatically accelerated phase 1. Phase 1 is the integration of online learning into the mainstream university systems. And over the past year, there's been a rapid push for institutions to figure out online. And they've learned, by and large, that you can actually deliver education online. Now, it hasn't always been good, but universities have shown they can deliver education online. And I think that integration of online is here to stay. Phase 2, growth of partnerships, the global multi-university networks. Kristu Jayanti and Trinity Western University have been collaborating now for, I think, about 7 years. Great collaboration. Conferences that we've collaborated on, faculty and administrative exchange, a lot of lectures and presentations back and forth between institutions. And these kinds of multi-university or global networks are going to be critically important for the future, especially as we move into research collaborations and into program development collaborations, which is up here at phase 4. Phase 3 is pathway or progression creation, creating academic, language, inter-university pathways. Students can go from an undergraduate degree to a graduate degree. They can go from certificates or diploma into bachelor's degrees, creating pathways where students have a seamless transition from one institution to another. Phase 4 is new degree innovation. Universities who can learn how to create new degrees quickly for emerging markets. Developing credentials that make students ready for the future within the economies that they're going into. Phase 5, RPL, competency-based education. Normalizing the recognition of prior learning and credentializing outputs rather than focusing just on inputs within universities. Universities that start to break free of credit course-based structures and towards recognition of learning competencies. Talk about a crazy idea, but in innovation, I've sometimes talked to people about, well, could you have a credit-free university that doesn't actually give credits, they give degrees, where you break free from a course-by-course credit structure and you measure the outcomes of learning for university graduates. Phase 6, which I believe is probably 10 or 20 years away, and this is blockchain. Blockchain is used in financial transactions in terms of Bitcoin, and blockchain is a way of attaching a value and a credit to some kind of a financial currency or valuation, and having it recorded and travel with that Bitcoin, and it moves around. Blockchain in education is where you would create a credit structure to leverage open source learning, where students could learn in an open source fashion, but you could create this structure within which you could create credentialization of education and degrees. I've looked a little bit at the NEP 2020, and I'm not an expert. So if I get it wrong, you can all tell me I'm wrong, because I don't really know. But I've read quickly through the NEP 2020, and I do have some thoughts on where I think there are going to have to be consideration of the impact of NEP 2020. First, NEP 2020 talks about more internationalization and an emphasis on increasing foreign universities in India. And I think on the one hand, that's a great emphasis. On the other hand, and I know that from experience in Canada, more internationalization will change the universities of India. It will change the way their composition, who's in the universities, it'll change their faculty, and it'll change the way they think about themselves in terms of their placement in the world. And those changes can sometimes come in quite abrupt ways for universities, and I expect that that'll happen. The increasing foreign universities in India will create more competition. Foreign universities might displace some private Indian universities. There will be brand competition in the Indian marketplace as a result of foreign universities coming into the competitive landscape. And I believe the universities and colleges in India will have to figure out their value proposition and competitive positioning before foreign university entrants make their way into India en masse. And I believe the best way to do that is to prepare yourselves to be competitive with foreign institutions. And often that will be in the form of research collaborations in terms of internationalization of local Indian colleges and universities so that they stand out and they're no longer, it's no longer seen as a flight to quality to go to a foreign university positioned inside India. And so I think that's something that might start to happen as a result of NEP 2020. I think if that happens, there'll be an increase in collaboration. Indian universities might increase collaborative opportunities, try to work with more foreign universities, maybe try to work on a microcampus model like the model Trinity Western University is working on, in order to start bringing in a foreign university within their own university system, rather than waiting for the foreign universities to set up shop across the street or in their own city. And that might be a way for them to have a piece of the expanding foreign university market that comes into India. Last, Indian universities will have a challenge with creating a four-year bachelor's model, but there may be collaborative ways to do it. And I'll give you one collaboration. For about 15 years, Trinity Western University has worked with Chinese universities on a model called an EDGE model. And the EDGE model works like this. The students do 3 years at the Chinese university. They do the 4th year through Trinity Western University. The Chinese university counts the 4th year towards their degree to give a 4-year degree. And Trinity Western University counts the 4th year towards the 1st year of a master's program at Trinity Western University. The students then do 1 additional year at Trinity Western University in Canada and get a master's degree. So this EDGE model allows that 4th year to be something that benefits the Indian student, or the Chinese student in this case, and benefits their growth towards master's degrees in the future. For those students who just want the bachelor's degree, what happens in the EDGE model is they get a certificate in international business management from Trinity Western University alongside the 4-year bachelor's degree from the Chinese university. And that model has been very successful for Trinity, as I said, for about 12 years. So the future, how do we achieve mission and vision in university partnerships? And we would say that's in a connected global higher education network. Trinity Western University is a global university. It aspires to be creative, adapted, and networked to meet the needs of learners wherever they are, and to find places to equip learners to be effective all around the world. The way we've done that right now as a university is we've done that through partnership. There are many different types of partnerships, and I'll talk about a few of the ones that we've been involved in over the years at Trinity Western University. We've partnered with the Tianjin University of Finance and Economics in China in terms of a foreign joint venture where we offer an MBA program, our MBA program in China, and it's offered in 3 locations in Beijing, Shanghai, and Tianjin, all in northern China. We also offer with Nanhai Business College in Shenzhen, in the south of China. We offer our Master of Arts in Leadership program all throughout China as well. So these are 2 programs where we have been involved in these international collaborations and what we would call foreign joint ventures. In addition, we've been actively involved in the development of what we call our Far Center model. The Far Center model of education FAR stands for Facilitated Academic Resource Center. And we've established these centers at Stella Maris College in Chennai, Bishop Stewart University in Uganda, House of Freedom in Nigeria. These are different locations where Trinity Western University has sent teachers to deliver education in those centers. And students are preparing through these partnerships to come and finish their degrees in Canada. For many of these students, they actually won't come to Canada. They'll finish their full degree in a partnership in their home country. As we look at expanding university partnerships and internationalization, there are a lot of directions you can go in. Universities have to think about different things. They have to think about in-migration of students. And if they do that and bring students in from the outside, they have to think about acculturation. They have to think about the acculturative stress and the adjustment of students. About 7 or 8 years ago, I published a paper on international student adjustment into universities in Canada. And the paper was very interesting. What the paper found is that the hardest parts of students adjusting to coming to Canada, there's two parts. One is language. If they have difficult time speaking English, it affects all of their life because we're an English speaking country. They can't shop, they can't get a driver's license, they can't go to the doctor, they can't do it. So the inability to properly speak English becomes this all-encompassing issue that has to be addressed. Second thing is that students who come from around the world need service and support in basic life. How to get a driver's license, how to use the transit system, the buses, public transit, how to walk, what are the areas that are safe to walk in, how do you shop, who do you trust, who might cheat you when you go to the market to buy things. All of these simple things, where to go see a movie, these simple things are the things that make it very difficult for international learners coming into any country. And I expect that as India grows its international student population, they'll have to deal with these things like, can international students easily go into hostels? How are you going to handle the behavior, the relationship-based behavior, maybe between men and women with students who come from other parts of the world? Are they going to respect the culture of India? How are you going to deal with healthcare? How are you going to deal with driver's licenses and insurance? These are the issues that universities are going to have to struggle through if they really want to internationalize their institutions. That's first. The second thing, as universities in India think about internationalization, is they have to think about how they're going to form their partnerships. They can form basic student exchange partnerships where students can go back and forth between the institutions. The challenge with that is it's hard to get university students from abroad to want to come to India into the university framework. So how do you do that? How do you get those students to want to come to India? What is the value proposition that gives them an advantage to coming and studying in India? In addition, how do you do partnerships that become balanced? How do you do student exchange where it's balanced between institutions? Part three, how do you do research collaborations? How do you do research collaborations that are fair and equitable, where you might have different research policies? For example, at Trinity Western University, our research is governed by the Tri-Council in Canada, which is Medical Research Council of Canada, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and National Science Research Council of Canada, the three main granting agencies of the Government of Canada. All research in Canada has to fit under the guidelines of those three bodies. I expect that in India, there are national research councils as well. If you start to get into research, the question becomes, how do you conduct research in a way that meets the guidelines of those different research councils that may have different policies around them? And that becomes tricky. It becomes tricky for the universities to figure out how to navigate that relationship when it comes to research collaborations. As universities try to internationalize, if you move to the next level, you move to foreign joint ventures. And we have a lot of experience in foreign joint ventures, and not all of the experience is good. How do you handle financial currencies? How do you handle financial transactions between institutions? Do the students pay one institution or the other institution? or do the students pay the home institution and they transfer funds between institution? And how do you handle that agreement? Where is the jurisdiction? If Trinity Western, for example, delivers education in India, the jurisdiction for the academic components of the program have to reside in Canada, because that's where we have permission to deliver the degree. But the jurisdiction legally for the physical resource, the infrastructure, the technology has to reside in India, because that's where the students might be living and taking their program. And if it's reversed, then it's vice versa. How do you write an agreement that properly respects the legal jurisdiction of those two areas? And how then do you manage the legal jurisdiction? Go beyond the legal jurisdiction. How do you manage the educational jurisdiction? Who has the right to grant degrees in various institutions? Where is the right to grant the degree going to be held, and how do you process those degrees? After you get through those high level issues to navigate, you get to the level of the actual courses and the actual credit. How long is the course? What's the qualification of the faculty member delivering the course? Are you going to count the courses one for one between these institutions? And how are you going to accredit those courses on transcripts if you're dealing with a foreign joint partnership? Those become some of the big issues in internationalization that challenge universities to figure these things out and to try to sort through the relationships long term. This all goes back to my first point. If you want to internationalize and if you want to form foreign partnerships, the first thing is you have to develop a relationship with an institution that has some experience. The second thing is you have to develop a relationship with an institution, and probably even deeper than the institution, with people who you know are going to be around for the long haul. You have to look at the relationship as a 10, 20-year relationship, not a 5-year relationship. And you have to invest in time, in traveling back and forth, in hosting each other, in doing things like international conferences together. You have to share the relationship with each other enough to trust each other and commit to a long-term relationship, because that's the only thing that will allow partnership internationally to withstand the ups and downs that are inevitable when you enter into international collaborations. I want to thank you for listening to me today. My title's actually changed. I'm Vice President of Innovation, Global and Academic Partnerships at Trinity Western University. I've got my new title on this slide. I've got my email here if you're interested in sending me an email and asking me a question. I'm very grateful to Kristu Jayanti College for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today, and for the collaboration we have together, for Father Augustine, for his great leadership of Kristu Jayanti College, and our friendship, which goes over many, many years back and forth between Canada and India, and for the great faculty and staff at Kristu Jayanti. I look forward to seeing you again, and I'm open for questions now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. I request participants to type in their question in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask the questions.
Professor, good morning. Thank you very much for this excellent session, what we had. It is not a question as such, it's an observation. I request you to react on that. You have been, Trinity Western University had been, in our country for many academic collaborations, including Kristu Jayanti.
Yes.
As you know, ours is an emerging economy, it's a developing economy. And the NEP stresses upon a lot of input on universities can come to the campus. And how come, when the university is coming and setting up the campus here in the country, students should pay according to the fees. The fees and structure is entirely different. So do you think that our Indian students can afford to pay the fee which is fixed by the international universities?
Well, there's definitely a market in India
Yeah.
for students to pay those fees.
Yeah.
And I think, think about it in this way. Let's say, you have Toyota operating in an area. Toyota has some pretty nice cars.
Yeah.
And they'll sell those cars to the wealthiest of people, because if Toyota is the only type of car that's being sold, people will buy the top of the line best Toyota. But as soon as Mercedes comes in, not everyone's going to afford a Mercedes, but Toyota might lose its top end,
Yeah.
of most affluent of the population who will choose Mercedes, as an example.
Yeah.
I think the same is potentially true for Indian institutions. There could be a situation where foreign universities come in and they will take the top university students off of the system, and they will go to the foreign university partners. I think the other thing is that foreign universities may drop their prices a little bit in India in order to capture the market. We've done price elasticity studies in India to determine breakpoints of different markets, and we have a pretty good idea of where the price breakpoint is for reasonable student enrollments. So I think there's enough of a market that will pay.
Yeah.
Many of those students might already be going abroad and would stay in India for part of their education.
Correct.
I don't know, but
Yes, correct. What do you?
Are there any other questions?
Any questions, ma'am? Any more
Delegates?
clarifications? Any questions in the chat box?
Professor Phil, I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Nelson.
From your observation, what are the shortcomings we face in India?
So the question was, if everyone didn't hear it, what are the shortcomings we face in India based on my observations? I think, and I don't know, so I have to be careful because I don't know all of the Indian education system. I think my view of Indian education to some extent is that it's very transactional in nature. And what I mean by that is Indian education is primarily designed for students to get jobs. Like it's get an education, get a better degree from a better university, get a good placement, get a job, and start your career. And it's kind of a bit of a system that's transactional. You pay your money, you do your work, you get your placement, you start your job, and then the parents have done a good job with you, right? And then if you get a good job and a good placement with a good degree, you marry a good person who's got a good job and a good placement and a good degree, and then your kids are okay because they have enough money. And it's all hinged on the same sort of transactional model, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying I know that. I just think that's the kind of way I experience things. I think that the challenge is that in that model, the students don't value the education itself enough. They value the education as a means to an end. Like, it's like everything is a means to an end, right? This course is a means to get a degree, which is a means to get a good job and a placement, which is a means to get a spouse that has which is a means to get a good house. And so they're living in this means ends way of thinking. And I think that's not terrible. There's nothing wrong, but it creates a very transactional engagement with the students. And I think what you'll find with foreign brands coming in is foreign brands will try to capitalize on, we're going to change your life. Like, we're going to change it in fundamentally different ways and Indian institutions have to sort of spend some time trying to figure that part out. How are we going to be competitive in that kind of space? Because I think that is a bit of a different space. That would be my experience on what the challenge is. And I'm not sure how you deal with it, but I think that's part of the challenge.
More questions? I think, Professor, you are very clear and you
Yeah,
have conveyed your message, I think.
Oh, someone has a raised
Yes,
hand in
yes.
the.
somebody raised a hand. Yeah.
Dr. Pratima, you can ask.
Yeah, Professor, wonderful session. First of all, the information, the slides, and the narration, what you had, I really felt wonderful. Thanks so much for your so lucid presentation.
Thank you.
I wish to ask that when you've analyzed Indian condition pretty decently and in depth as well, what do you say with the new policy, how we are emerging, and how the principal also mentioned that 2020, 21, 22, we are expecting to roll it at higher education as well. What is your advice for the students to really capitalize on the opportunities which are going to come, especially through internationalization of the education? And not in terms of the affordability, but in terms of how they can really cash upon the caliber basis, because that they may do it in little early, perhaps in the 11th and 12th standard, what we call in our country.
Yeah.
So do you have some advice? And correspondingly, if you permit me to ask the related question, can you do you have some ways and means which you can share for the institutions to really make sure they can just go through that and enable their own students for the wonderful time which is going to come? I'm sure it will be competitive for sure. Could you please throw some light on these aspects?
Well,
Thank you.
Do you want the good news or the bad news? I think anytime the competitive landscape changes, and this is not education, this is everything, business. Every time the competitive landscape changes, there are winners and losers. And there will be losers in Indian education system. I believe the losers will be small, niche, single degree institutions that have become places that are just churning out graduates to get them their BTECs, and that's it. And I believe they'll become losers in this changing landscape. One. Two, I think institutions in India who have not internationalized yet, that haven't laid the groundwork of relationships and internationalization, that are going, oh, there's going to be internationalization, we have to do something right now, are already behind. Universities or colleges like Kristu Jayanti, who have lots of collaborations. I've been there many times. I've seen international collaborations come and go. They're doing this all the time. They're far ahead of many of the institutions in India. So they're going to come out with already existing relationships and friendships that they can lean on as internationalization grows. Where other institutions are going to be saying, okay, how do we do this internationalization? They don't really know. So I think there will be winners and losers. I think for the students, what often happens when there's a new competitive landscape is there has to be a redefining of what constitutes value in that competitive landscape. And students will have to go through that. They'll have to figure out, okay, well, not all the foreign degrees are going to be good. Not all the foreign partners are going to be good. And a lot of the Indian universities are really, really good. And there won't be a flight away from Indian institutions, but the quality of education will start to become more and more important for those students, because they won't have enough time to know the market impact of their choices. Like if you have foreign suppliers, the impact of going to a foreign university in India won't be known for 10 years, right? The student will go to the university, will do their degree over 4 years, will graduate and get their diploma. They'll go out and get a job. Everyone's going to get a first job. The question is, where are they 10 years after they finish their degree? And are they farther ahead as someone than someone who went to an Indian university? They're not going to know the answer to that question right away. Does that make sense? And so the answers to those questions are going to have to be defined as we go along. And I believe many Indian colleges and universities can become significant players if they continue to work on the quality of their education, continue to build industry partners, and continue to work on international collaborations in a strong way. And if they can do that, they can show high value, probably at a lower price point than someone going to a foreign university partner. Anyways, those are my thoughts on what I expect will likely happen. I saw someone else with their hand up trying to say something. I don't know if they were waving down a taxi or asking a question. On Zoom, you can't always tell.
Yes, Professor Madhu.
There's another raised hand, I think.
Yes. Professor, you can unmute yourself and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can ask the question.
Somebody raise a hand kindly. I
Yes.
mean, you can unmute and then.
Yes, ma'am, you can ask the question.
In case somebody finds it difficult to raise, ask the question, they can type it on the chat box so that they can read it out. Ranjita ma'am, shall we proceed further?
There's one from Dr. Nelson.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, you can proceed.
So the question in the chat is, so two questions. Well, one's harder, so I'll leave that question. How would you rate the ease of doing business in India with reference to education? From Dr. Nelson is the question. Oh boy, how would I rate the ease of doing business in India? Now, okay, so I haven't done business in India. So I'm going on reading, conjecture, relationships, that's it. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I think I'll give you what I think are the challenges to doing business in India, and you can all look strange, make strange faces at me. I think the number one challenge in doing business in India that I've seen is India is a highly bureaucratized system. India comes out of the British East India Company, comes out of a company structure which has very distinct hierarchical structures in it. And it has a sentiment of socialism within the political architecture of India. Because of that, unions are strong. India is very strong in its bureaucracy. People like to see their role as having prominence and importance. So they want their stamp, their approval to mean something. So every layer of the bureaucratic system, I think in India, has people who want to prove I'm important and you're going to do what I need you to do for me to sign that paper. So the starting point in India, I think, that makes business difficult is this bureaucratic structure and system and the entrenchment of roles, first of all. I think in addition to that, there is an ongoing issue of corruption in India, which I know is reduced over time, but it plays into the same system, which can be a challenge of doing business in India. At the same time that I see those challenges structurally, I also see a lot of innovation in India. The high-tech world is booming in India. India has the largest number of computer coders of anywhere in the world. And the Indian government has invested in technology in a massive way. Now, I find it ironic that India has this fantastic technology with coders all over the place. And I traveled to India 6 times in a row, and the same road that's under construction is under construction for 6 years. To me, that's astonishing. Like, I can't figure that part out. I can't reconcile those two things. But I think doing business in India, like everywhere in the world, has its unique challenges and its unique opportunities. I guess that would be my take on doing business in India. I don't know if it's accurate or inaccurate, but.
Professor, we have 2 more questions.
Okay.
We answer that.
Fintech.
Yeah.
Fintech, I think, is financial technologies. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Right. You know what? To be honest, I have no idea. That's a great question, and I'll do some research, but I'm not someone that can help with that decision, with that question. So Marvin, Frank, I apologize. Maybe if I see you again, you can ask me the question again. I'll do some research and I might be able to give you a better answer.
Professor, another question in the chat box. Could you please throw light on language and the cultural barrier of the foreign universities?
Yeah.
From Professor Madhu.
To be honest, in my travels around India, this particular issue is less problematic in the South. So South India is going to be much better at foreign internationalization. The culture of South India is more open. The food is, I think, easier generally on foreigners, and the English is better, and the technology tends to be better. So I think there's differences. One of the things I was going to say about doing business in India, is there are dramatic regional differences in India. I when I talk to people about India, I say India is more of a continent than it is a country. Like, the people are different, the food's different. Like, you can't generalize India, because there just is no way of generalizing India easily. It's
We have
different
28
people.
countries. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to language and cultural barriers, I think the South, and to some extent, I think the influence of Christianity in the South is part of the reason. Because of that, and because of the trade through the ports in the South, historically, you have Portuguese, you have English, you have Scottish, all throughout the south of India, you have a lot more internationalization already in the South. And so I think, Bangalore, Chennai, Kochi, even Mumbai will do well in the international efforts in India. I think the northern Indian parts will be much more challenged with internationalization, and international students will have a harder time in the north, in my own experience, in terms of cultural barriers and language barriers. Now the questions are coming fast and furious. Question, can you please tell about how to initiate foreign educational collaboration, the path to be followed by institutions? The next one I've got. Oh, well, the first thing I'll say is there is no path. There are many, many, many paths. The paths to internationalization are as unique as each person who does international education. Because I think my experience is that internationalization is driven by people, just like trade. Early trade was driven by people, and the good traders traded well. And the same is true of internationalization. You have to have people in your institution that absolutely believe in the path of internationalization and are sort of missionally and passionately committed to internationalization. If you have that, those people will figure out the best path for your institution. If you don't have people that are absolutely committed to internationalization, you're trying to push a big rock uphill that's going to be really difficult, and it could well roll backwards on those very people. Do you expect the so-called brain drain from India to reduce in the coming years? Well, that's an interesting question, because the people in India seem pretty smart to me, so the brain drain can't be that bad. That was a bit of a joke. I think, to be honest, if you look at some of the best leaders of North American companies or global companies, they are often people of Indian descent who have been educated in the West. I don't know. I think all countries face brain drain, and the best and the brightest will always look for the best opportunity they can get. And if India starts to provide those best opportunities for education, you will find that the best and the brightest will increasingly stay in India. That's what I believe in the future.
Professor, one more question.
One more.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We can quickly take that. Indian students may face the challenges of plagiarism when internationalization of higher education, especially the research-based assessments and open book examinations. Is that right? By Professor Pius Thomas.
It's absolutely right. And it's not, I'm actually a little bit of an expert on plagiarism of our international students. The source of plagiarism is often not that students want to cheat. The source of plagiarism is that many students who are international students fear failure. They fear their parents' reaction to failure. They fear the professor's reaction to their failure, and they're afraid of failure. And I believe in order to address plagiarism, you have to build a culture of accountability that's balanced and even. So often faculty members, parents, teachers, and educators in countries around the world only value high outcomes. They don't value processes. They don't teach young people to engage in good processes. They just value the age student. And if you maintain that culture, you end up with plagiarism because everyone is trying to take the shortest route to get to an A, to get to the top grade. And so really, it's more of a cultural issue to address plagiarism than it is an academic issue. You have to train people to believe in a process of education, to work hard for their outcomes and learn how to do that effectively, and to learn how to be held accountable and to learn by failing forward, which is something that we teach a lot in leadership. How do you fail forward? How do you learn from your failure to become better in the future? If young people, and we find this with our international students, if they can understand that process, and then we as educators come alongside them and say, I'm going to help you with that process right from the beginning. So if I say to an international student in their first semester at Trinity Western University, hey, I know you're going to want to plagiarize because it's hard to come to Canada. It's hard to get an A in this course. I get that. I don't want you to plagiarize. So this is what I'm going to do. I am knowing that you're going to want to, you're going to be tempted to plagiarize. I'm going to create assessments and give you support and help you with writing coaches to make sure you're going to be as successful as you can be. And you don't have to plagiarize because you're going to actually learn the material. And I think that's where we have to go with plagiarism. Rather than seeing plagiarism as a wrong that students commit, we have to see plagiarism as a coping strategy that students move towards, and we have to help them to cope better with their academic processes in reasonable ways right from the beginning. And so that's the approach I tend to take in my classes, and I think a lot of the faculty at Trinity Western University take that approach. They'll start off the first semester, when I start out the first semester of my class, I hand the students my final exam. In fact, I put the final exam in the syllabus. I say, here's the final exam. I don't care if you cheat, right? Show up every day. And I've told you on this final exam, everything that is the most important stuff I want you to learn this semester. And I say, bring the final exam to every class. And as I'm lecturing and as I'm teaching, you start writing down the answers of the questions in the final exam in the spaces I've given you for the final exam questions. And people say I'm crazy. And I say, well, how am I crazy? I'm framing their learning. I'm giving them, this is what's most important to me. Write it out. And you know what happens? Students show up to every class, right? Because they know in order to do well in the class, they're going to have to show up and write down the answers that I've said in my final exam. And they do really well on the final exam, right? Because what I care about is their learning. I don't care about the grade they get on the exam. And what happens is when I start to care deeply about their learning and what's happening to them as people, they get good grades on the final exam. So anyways.
Okay. I think Professor Piles, Professor Laird has answered your questions, I think.
Yeah.
I think there
you
are
can
no
go ahead,
more
ma'am.
questions.
Fine.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Let me formally end the session with a note of gratitude. With this thought-provoking session by Dr. Laird, stressing on technology as means, we are assertive that no country in the world can remain isolated from the global developments in knowledge production and academic influences they exert on national education systems. Knowledge is produced nationally but shared globally, with the highlight that there is a need for Indian education institution to remain globally connected and engaged through international collaborations and cooperations in knowledge production, and its sharing become an important step towards enhanced visibility to gain international academic credibility. This will surely help Indian higher education system through our new education policy to play a more promising global role in education. Thank you, Professor, for sharing your valuable inputs and enlightening us by your great insights. I also extend my sincere thanks to to all the delegates for their enthusiasm and active participation. Thank you, everyone. Now, I request everyone to turn on your video for a photograph. Request delegates to turn on your video for a photograph.
Hello,
Thank you
Philip. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good to meet you soon.
Okay.
Thank you once
Thank you
again.
all. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Next time in India. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thanks.
I request delegates to join us for the next session at 11:30 a.m. using the same credentials. Thank you.